Hello, so glad you are with us here this evening. Welcome to the WTOL 11 Toledo Mayoral Debate. I'm Jeff Smith, evening anchor here at WTOL 11. Over the next 60 minutes, without a single commercial, the candidates are going to answer a number of questions from both viewers and the WTOL 11 editorial board. In just a moment, I will be joined by my co-anchor, Melissa Andrews, as well as morning news anchors Tiffany, Tarpley, and Tim Miller. Now, to the two men running in this election. One looking to be re-elected, the other looking to reclaim an office he has held before. Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz is a 48-year-old Democrat elected to his first term as mayor of Toledo in 2017. He served as Lucas County Treasurer from 2005 through 2018 and on to City Council from 2001 to 2005. His opponent, as decided by voters in the September primary election, is 82-year-old independent and former Toledo Mayor Carty Finkbeiner. Finkbeiner most recently served as mayor from 2006 to 2010. He was first elected to the office in 1993 and served 2 terms until 2002. He was a member of the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority Board between his time as mayor and spent 8 years on Toledo City Council and 2 years as deputy mayor. Gentlemen, the format of our debate is as follows. Each of you will have 1 minute for opening statements. Then you will hear questions from each of our panelists, other WTOL 11 journalists speaking with members of the community, and each candidate will have the opportunity to ask the other one question. The candidate to whom the question is directed will have 1 minute to answer, and his opponent will have 45 seconds for rebuttal. If either candidate directly attacks the other, I will offer 30 seconds for that candidate to respond. We flipped a coin before the debate to determine who would go first, and tonight, that honor goes to Carty Finkbeiner. You have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Thank you, Jeff and Team 11. I know the mayor and I are both delighted to be here. I could talk to you about things we got done, like build a new Jeep plant, an Owens Corning World Headquarters, the docks in East Toledo, won an All-America City Award, and we drove drug dealers out of neighborhoods. But I'd like to look to the future because that's where both the incumbent mayor and I are thinking. I'd like to think about the containerized cargo idea that was advanced very recently in light of the fact that there is an absence of grocery products and other products getting into the stores of this country. I'd also like Toledo to emphasize how proud we are of our blue-collar background and work with our school systems and the junior colleges to emphasize that working with your hands is excellent. I'd like to bring the Block Watch programs back. The Block Watch programs would not only be about fighting crime and violence, but about blight in Toledo neighborhoods. And I'd like for us to work with the University of Toledo.
Opening statement there by Carty Finkbeiner. We now have the floor open. 1 minute opening statement for Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz.
When incumbents are running for re-election, voters often ask themselves 2 questions. 1, am I better off than I was 4 years ago? And 2, did he or she keep his or her promises? I think the voters of Toledo in this election, in reviewing my record, will be able to answer yes to both. Now, goodness knows we still have challenges here in this city, and I'm sure we'll talk about those challenges this evening. But there's no question that generally speaking across the board, we are better off than we were 4 years ago because we've built momentum. We're winning economic development awards the city has never won before. Our budget is in the best shape it's ever been. We're resurfacing more miles of road than we ever have. And for the first time in over a decade, we are growing the size of the police force. The police force is larger today than it was when I became mayor. I take my responsibility seriously, and I pride myself on keeping promises. I promised we'd develop Southwick, and we did. I promised we'd grow the size of the police force, and we did. I promised we'd get the regional water deal done, and we did. I promised we'd get the budget in order, and we did. The elections are about the future. I'm excited to build on what we've done over the next 4 years.
Opening statements for you there tonight. We now open the floor to questioning, and I bring in my co-anchor, Melissa Andrews, with our first question.
Jeff, thanks so much. And gentlemen, I'd like to thank you so much for being here as well. Our first question tonight is for you, Mr. Mayor. And this question comes from John Petrowski, who asks, can you explain why Summit Street and Dorr Street needed to be cosmetically improved for Solheim Cup attendees, while streets like Lewis Avenue, which are in much worse shape, have been bypassed? Are visitors' perceptions of Toledo more important to you than people who live here and who give their tax dollars to Toledo? Mr. Mayor?
When we faced the decision on Summit Street, we thought that we were going to have to choose between making improvements to Summit Street and making improvements elsewhere in the city. Fortunately, because of the leadership of the voters of the city of Toledo in passing the Toledo Roads Levy, we were able to do both. And so while we did make important improvements to some of the larger roads in our community, I think the big story of 2021 is the historic year we had resurfacing roads all over the city. Now, I know you mentioned Lewis Avenue, that's a larger road, but inside the neighborhoods, residential road repair, this year we broke every record the city has ever had. We did 15 times more residential roads this year than we did last year. Last year we resurfaced 7 residential roads. This year we did over 140, a 15-time increase. As it turns out, we were able to do both. We were able to make important investments in the core of our community and fix some big roads. But for the first time in the city's history, we now have a standalone source of money that could only be spent on roads. And we did it this year at a record pace.
45 seconds for challenger Carty Finkbeiner on that same topic.
Respectful to the mayor, we've had a capital improvements budget forever in the city of Toledo, and capital improvements money is meant to be spent solely on infrastructure improvements. As mayor, I made sure that we did not spend a penny of that capital improvements money on anything other than street improvements, and we improved 40 street miles, 10 out of the 12 years that I was mayor. Secondly, I'm concerned when I see Summit Street being redone, repaved, improved twice in 2 years. That was a waste of taxpayers' money. That money could have gone into the neighborhoods to improve many of our neighborhoods in the city of Toledo.
And now we will open the floor. A question for Carty Finkbeiner from morning anchor Tim Miller.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to the candidates who are here tonight as well. Mr. Finkbeiner, wanted to ask you, you've been mayor 3 times already for the city of Toledo. You had 2 consecutive terms, then you had to go out for the term limits, and then you came back for another 4 years. Why do you want another term, and what do you say to people who think a vote for Carty is a vote for the past when we want to move forward? What would you say to those voters?
Well, for those who would say is a vote for the past, I would say the past under Carty Finkbeiner was pretty good. All-America city, 3rd most livable city in the world according to the United Nations. Our drinking water was rated in the top 10, and 1 year we had exactly 13 murders, and we will get into the 60s in all probability this year. But the #1 reason is violence in the neighborhoods and blight in the neighborhoods, and I believe they're tied together. I also think we need to bring back, and we did have about 200 block watch programs in the city. I believe we're down to somewhere around 20. I like citizens working with the Toledo Police Department in concerns with the neighborhoods, and I think we add blight to those concerns and we strengthen our block watch programs.
Mr. Mayor, 45 seconds to also comment.
I'm all for romanticizing the past, but to some extent I worry that Carty is relying on the voters to forget about some parts of his record during his time as mayor. During his first 2 terms as mayor, he doubled the size of the debt of our city. I know we will talk about one of the decisions he made in the last time he was mayor, and that is laying off 75 police officers, and he left the mayor after him with a $48 million deficit. Now, mayors make tough decisions, and I don't begrudge him any of the decisions he made, but elections are about the future. We don't have to go to the past. We don't have to go back to laying off police officers, budgets that are busted, record debt, bad real estate deals. We can continue building on the progress we've made, and under me, over the next 4 years, we will.
Mr. Finkbeiner, you were called out by name on that. I will give you 45 seconds to respond.
In 2007 and 2008, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States had to call the 2 candidates for the presidency to Washington, D.C. because America's budget was bankrupt. We were down $72 million over 2007 and 2008 as a result of Jeeps not being sold and homes being foreclosed upon. I can tell you that we ended my watch with a deficit of $12 million. I can also tell you we did a fantastic job of minimizing layoffs, in minimizing hurt to the voters. I myself went out and cut City Park's grass. We did everything we could to reflect the challenge of those moments.
Our next question tonight from morning anchor Tiffany Tarpley.
Well, Mr. Mayor, in your opening statement, you mentioned promises. And one of those promises that you made was universal pre-K. Of course, we know how important education is, the foundation for that, especially for young people at that early age. We know that voters defeated your proposal to fund preschool for all in Toledo. Will you put it before voters again, or will you find a different source of funding to make this happen?
Well, 4 years ago, I did promise to raise it as a civic issue and do everything we could to get more kids access to early childhood education. We've kept that promise. In fact, without any support from the taxpayers, there are now over 200 4-year-olds who are getting access to free pre-K who didn't have it before I became mayor. And that might not seem like a big number, and I think there's about 4,000 in our community who need it, but to those 200 kids, that makes all the world a difference. I'm proud I raised it on the campaign trail. I'm proud I followed through. There are no plans to put something like this on the ballot, certainly not this year or in the foreseeable future. We're going to continue to build and to help our kids. We've been able to get those 200 kids pre-K through the generosity of philanthropy, and I'd like to see us continue to do that.
Mr. Finkbeiner, you have 45 seconds.
I think we are all concerned about pre-K children. We do know that there's evidence that they get more attention, they get more TLC, and they get a little more learning earlier. It is good for them. However, that responsibility rests upon the Toledo public school system, not the city of Toledo. The city of Toledo has a hard time paving streets. City of Toledo has a hard time protecting people living in the neighborhoods. The responsibility should not be even considered as part of the $190 million, because 2 years from now, that money will not be available to continue the pre-K education.
We wanted to make sure all communities were heard from going into this debate. And gentlemen, you have been campaigning about it to hear from the residents of the Glass City. We check in with some of those comments that we got. Zainab Shaib with that tonight.
I spoke with Ahmad Alwishi, who has been a resident in Toledo for 25 years, an Arab American, and also a local business owner. He has a question for both candidates about the safety in our community.
As my main concern is about the safety. I own a business in Old West End, and I don't see no blue cameras in the sky cover the area, particularly the area compared to the other areas in Toledo. So there's a lot of kids across the street. It's not safe at all, a lot of bad traffic. So that probably helped me as a business owner and help the community too.
So specifically, Mr. Finkbeiner, we will start with you. Will you add more cameras to monitor crime, specifically in the Old West End?
Yes, I will also add police, as the mayor says he will do the same thing. We agree that we need more policemen in the city of Toledo, but right now what we need more than more cameras and more policemen is leadership. Leadership from this mayor, leadership from the safety director, and leadership from the chief of police. We've never had the violence, not only murders, we've had over 2,000 residences with bullets fired into them this year in the city of Toledo. Unheard of in our city. We need to get a game plan that's beyond 5 well-meaning young men who do not have a clue how to stop the violence, and that is the fault of the mayor, the safety director, and the chief of police. They need to get a plan. I have a 10-point plan. We used the 10-point plan previously. It works, and it will work if I'm elected mayor.
Mr. Mayor, making reference there to the violence interrupters, you have 45 seconds.
Well, to answer the gentleman's question directly, yes, we are going to have more of those blue cameras, but it's not just an empty promise. I can tell you how we're going to do it. In the American Rescue Plan proposal, the one I introduced in mid-October to City Council, there's $1.2 million specifically to add more of those blue cameras. And broadly speaking, there's over almost $6 million to provide police the tools and technologies they need to get the job done. We're We're going to expand ShotSpotter, for instance, into East Toledo, which is another tool that helps keep us safe. There's a lot of things that we can do to improve the safety of our communities, but I would hope that we could all agree that laying off police is never an answer. Carty did lay off police the last time he was mayor, only mayor since the Great Depression to do that. I grew the size of the police force for the first time in over a decade. I think the best way to predict future actions is past performance.
Mr. Finkbeiner, this has been brought up many times on the campaign trail so far this year. You have 45 seconds.
Thank you. With the budget breaking we were going through, we had one last recourse in 2007. And Mike Navarro, the police chief, came to me and he said, Mayor, we can lay off 150 police officers for 90 days. I said, Mayor, 150 is too much. What can we respectively do? He said, I could lay off 75 and I can freeze vacations. I can get men that have been behind desks in the safety building out on the streets. And 90 days later, we can bring them all back through the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. We did that because it was our last resort. It was responsible, and the politics that the mayor has played with this is shameful.
Mayor, I'll give you another 45 seconds.
The history that Carty tells with regard to then Chief, now Sheriff Navarre is a fascinating history. Sheriff Navarre doesn't remember it that way. That's part of the reason Sheriff Navarre has endorsed my candidacy for mayor for re-election, as have all these safety groups who've endorsed in this race. I understand it's convenient for Carty to say we had to do this. We were in the middle of a recession. Well, guess what? I had a recession too under my watch. It was called the pandemic recession. The difference is how you respond to it. When faced with a recession, Carty laid off police officers. When faced with a recession, I've grown the size of the police force. It's just a fundamental difference of how we have approached leadership during our time as mayor. But as John Adams said, you can be entitled to your own opinion, can't be entitled to your own facts.
Gentlemen, we continue to get questions from our community. Our next one for the mayor coming from Roxanne Elias.
I spoke with Tanya Duran, who is a lifelong resident of the Old South End, Toledo, and is now the co-director of the Belief Center. She has some concerns within the Latino community and also youth services and programming.
My one question is, my concern is that the kids in the South End are being left behind, and we need more programming and services here in the South End. What investment are you going to put in the South End?
Mr. Mayor, we'll begin with you.
Number of investments are planned for the South End, and many have already begun. This past year, we spent an all-time record in terms of youth programming in the city, $1.4 million to do the sort of youth program that had never been done before in the city. Under my Toledo Rescue Plan introduced to City Council 2 weeks ago, we tripled that amount, so that we tripled the amount of programming. And it doesn't matter to me whether a kid is playing a sport or learning to code, learning chess, or some other skill, we have the resources, and we're investing the resources to make a difference all across Toledo, including the South End. And I guess specifically, if your question is about the historic South End, also in the Toledo Recovery Plan, we've set aside $500,000 for a pilot program to help the businesses along the corridor get ready to turn those shops into places that are ready to develop. The fact that we brought a Cal Ripken diamond to Broadway, it's the only diamond of its kind in Ohio, it's in that neighborhood. We've done some things and we have more to do.
Mr. Finkbeiner, investments in the South End, the topic.
A very important topic. The mayor takes credit for things he really had nothing to do with, including getting the money from the Cal Ripken Foundation to build a baseball diamond in the South End. Chris Amata and the South Toledo Historic Association deserve the credit for that. They also deserve the credit for the houses that are being rebuilt and renewed and repainted in the South End. I think the challenge to the South End, and I drive through the South End home every night, is how we care for some of the main streets, which have received very little attention from the city of Toledo, including Broadway, as you drive out toward Walbridge Park, and they need attention. I would suggest that the mayor focus upon the infrastructure of the South End, and we'll grow a better South Toledo.
Mr. Mayor, he says you're taking advantage of something for which you had nothing to do with. Your answer.
Well, unfortunately for Carty, this is the second time he has name-dropped someone who who is endorsing me and is rejecting Carty's candidacy of the past. Chris Amato supports me. Why? Because he knows what a leadership role the city played in bringing that Cal Ripken diamond to the Broadway corridor. The city put several $100,000 of taxpayer money toward that project, and I suppose while it might be convenient to say that we didn't do anything, I think the taxpayers of Toledo would concede that hundreds of thousands of dollars of their hard-earned money isn't nothing. It's an investment. It's an investment I'm glad that we made, and we have so much more to do as we build upon the successes of the last 4 years.
Gentlemen, as we said at the top of the hour, as we laid out the ground rules for how this was going to play out here today, we said there would be an opportunity for each candidate to ask a question of the other. We start with Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz and a question he can ask directly to Mr. Finkbeiner.
Carty, in 1999, you vetoed an ordinance that would have doubled the size of the police class. In 2015, the Toledo Blade quoted you as saying that Toledo had too many police officers, and as we've already discussed, the last time you were mayor, you laid off 75 police officers and proposed eliminating the gang task force. Given that record, is it your hope that the citizens of Toledo and the voters merely forget that during both good times and bad, you've largely built your career over 50 years of running for office on weakening the Toledo Police Department?
Well, that's certainly false. And I might add that I have not read that Sheriff Navarre has endorsed you, nor Chris Amato have endorsed you, but I don't brag about those kind of things. I think the police department is, as a general rule, well funded by the council and the mayor of the city of Toledo. The DROP program presents a challenge to us as officers can retire. And in recent years, we've lost some to suburbia. There's no question about it. Do you know that our Parks Department, at one time before this gentleman became mayor, had roughly 100 people on the payroll? As I understand it, it's down to 10. We privatized most of the city's Parks Department, and people wonder why the parks aren't properly being taken care of. I think the inspectors of the city of Toledo, which go out and examine houses, has been dramatically reduced also. I think the mayor's hung up on the police department, and one division did not endorse him, and he needs to spend a little more time on parks and inspectors, and our city would be cleaner.
Mr. Mayor, you have 45 seconds.
In fact, every safety organization that has conferred an endorsement in this race has endorsed my campaign. They know it's a tough addressing the problem of crime is tough, but they'd rather work with our administration, which has produced results, as opposed to policies from the past. In my question, what I really wanted to get at was how during good times and bad, Carty, unfortunately, has always looked at the police not as citizens who can serve and protect us, but as a way to balance the budget. He talks about the Great Recession of 2007 and 8. 1999, the economy was strong, and he still vetoed legislation that would have doubled the size of the police class. At any rate, I do agree with him that the past is the past, and elections are about the future. We don't have to go back to the past. We don't have to go back to days of police layoffs and busted budgets. We can build on the success we've had over these last 4 years, and under me, we will.
The challenger, Carty Finkbeiner, you now have your opportunity to ask a question directly of Mayor Kapszukiewicz.
Viewers, note that for the last 10 minutes, all the incumbent mayor has talked about is the policemen and the police department. No wonder there is so much blight and grime and dirt in the alleys, in the neighborhoods, way more than there was under Carty Finkbeiner. It's also true that we have not done the inspection job that was done when I was mayor, and had two top flight leaders in Bob Berger and Hank Bradley that went out, and we raised the number of inspections being done from roughly around 7 or 8 per day to 15 to 18 per day by our inspectors. There's nowhere near the number of inspectors. We are 200 yards from the Buckeye Greenbelt apartments. The city did nothing about that until Marcy Kaptur and Tina Butts brought to the attention of the city the deplorable conditions that exist in that complex. Only after Marcy really made a big deal about it did the city move on it. Now the city has moved, but way too late. We need policemen. We also need home inspectors. We also need park professionals working in our parks.
Is there a direct question for the mayor?
My direct question for the mayor?
Yes.
Wade, the case is open. You have an opportunity to make it tonight, but it would appear that you were attempting to politically bribe Buckeye Cable System by offering them $1 million. That did not go to Columbia Gas or Toledo Edison or any of the other companies. Only was offered by you, I'm told, directly to the CEO of Buckeye Cable System. That, to many people, smells of an attempted political buyout.
I'm still waiting for a question.
The question is, was it a political buyout?
Okay. Of course not. And Carty knows that as well. But in an election year, this, this sort of rhetoric scares people and confuses people. And when it's all you have, you use it. No, of course, that's not the case. And no one who's investigated it has found any indication of wrongdoing. I would say this, though. If implicit in Carty's question is some sort of an ethical lapse, I will say this. In the 185 years that Toledo has been a city, we've had 58 mayors. Only one has ever been convicted of an ethics violation. Now, he's in the studio tonight. It's not me. I'm proud of my record. I'm proud I've never embarrassed the city of Toledo. I'm proud I was never convicted of an ethics violation. I'm proud that we have succeeded in building our economy, fixing our roads, growing the size of the police force, getting the regional water deal done, and fixing our budget. That's what the voters care about, and I suspect that they will over the next 4 years as well.
Mr. Finkbeiner, just staying true to form, you've got 30 seconds to rebut.
Buckeye Cable System was not entitled to $1 million. Wade reversed his field after this was all made public, and the city has now hired attorneys to represent them as the Federal Bureau of Investigation continues the study of the matter. Earlier this year, we had 4 indictments from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The total involved in that was $40,000. The total involved in this gift was $1 million.
We continue with our questions from the community. This one from Emma Henderson.
Joseph Wood was born and raised in Toledo and is now a member of the Equality Toledo Board. He has a question about LGBTQ youth.
LGBTQ plus youth are disproportionately bullied in schools and in many cases homeless. What will you do as mayor to improve and make Toledo a better place for LGBT youth, especially trans youth?
Mr. Mayor, we'll start with you answering that question.
I've been a fighter for those in the LGBTQ community long before it was popular. When I was on city council 20 years ago, I introduced the first legislation to extend domestic partnership benefits to members of the community. And I can say under my watch, the city of Toledo has banned conversion therapy. And to your question, under my watch, transgendered employees of the city of Toledo now enjoy the same health care that other members of the city of Toledo, employees of the city of Toledo have. There's more work to do. And as you mentioned, bullying, especially in schools, is it's a heartbreaking reality for too many young people in our community. I do think there's a role to perhaps work with the Toledo Public School System and other educators to look for early warning signs, especially because tragically we know that the suicide rates for LGBTQ individuals is higher than it ought to be. I think that's something we can do in the future, but I am proud of my record on this issue going back 20 years.
Mr. Finkbeiner, 45 seconds on the same topic.
I think the city of Toledo, while one cannot rest ever, should be proud over the decades, about 25 years if my memory serves me correctly, of progress that we have made in recognizing first that there were challenges to the community we're discussing, and that there needed to be an awful lot more understanding and education taking place in our community. And I do believe that that has happened. I also want to speak to the youth question, and that is young men and women will meet with the mayor every 2 weeks. We will have a sit down, and I will listen to you tell me what you think we need to do to make programming for youth much better in this city.
Gentlemen, thank you for your thoughtful answers on that topic. We are at the bottom of the hour. Once again, you are tuned into the mayoral debate, Toledo mayoral debate between current Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz and challenger Carty Finkbeiner. My co-anchor Melissa Andrews back now with another question for our candidates.
Jeff, it's been said tonight that we can look into the future by looking into the past. So with that in mind, my next question tonight is for you, Mr. Finkbeiner. Your campaign signs say Carty loves Toledo. They even have hearts on them, but there are many, many people in Toledo who would not call you a lovable guy, and I do have examples. During your time as mayor, you were embroiled in several controversies, including being rough to staff. In fact, a former employee sued you in 1999, and in 2008, you did make national news for running 200 Marines who are engaging in a training exercise out of Toledo. And in 2009, there's that video of you yelling at a child while you tried to break up a fight, calling him fatso and tubby. Mr. Finkbeiner, have you changed, or is this a leadership style you plan to return to the mayoral seat?
First of all, in 12 years as mayor, I don't believe there was ever a very serious accusation backed up by facts. There were a lot of accusations, some of which are printed in a little book about myself. I would say this: leaders who really make a difference have critics and they have supporters. I think it's fair to say that I have a good number of critics, and I hope a greater number of supporters. I put my heart and soul into projects that no other politician in this city has ever weighed in with regard to: keeping Jeep, keeping Owens Corning fiberglass, keeping UTMC alive and well in South Toledo, fighting off those who wanted to take Toledo's water system and sell it to suburbia for a pittance. I think my record for standing up and counting for the important projects of this city is there, and I'll stand behind it.
Mayor Kapszukiewicz, would you like to chime in? 45 seconds.
And I think implicit in Carty's answer is that the facts are in question for some of the incidents that were just raised. If the facts were in question, then Carty and the city shouldn't have settled in court for the tens of thousands, indeed hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars that had to be paid out to settle some of these, I guess we'll call it bouts with temper. I don't have much more to say about that other than this. I can only focus on my leadership style. My leadership style has been calm and results-based. Guess what? I love Toledo too. But my commitment to calm, competent leadership has produced results. The Governor's Cup we won this year for economic development, the city has never won it in all its years. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of the way I've done it too.
WTOL's Tim Miller back with another question for our candidates tonight. Tim?
Yes, Jeff, I have a question for Mayor Kapszukiewicz. You were mayor last year when George Floyd was killed at the hands of a police officer in Minneapolis. And across the country, we had protests, including here in Toledo. Now, several people have been very critical of our police department for how they handled those protesters. In fact, dozens of them, or maybe 20, have sued police officers for excessive force, for injuries that were caused, broken bones, wounds, and stitches. As the mayor of this city, the police department and the safety forces are under your guise. Do you regret how that was handled, and should have there been more training for the police staff, and what will you do to make sure this doesn't happen again in future protests if you're reelected?
No, I'm proud not only of how we have grown the size of the police force after a decade, more than a decade of decline. I'm also proud of the reform that we implemented coming out of the George Floyd protests last summer. We implemented more reform, in my judgment, than most cities in this country, and we did it unilaterally. We did it because we thought it was right. Internal Affairs had been located in the safety building for 80 years. We moved it to a neutral site so people could feel more comfortable reporting an officer if they felt there was wrongdoing. You talked about training. We now open up to the public the training we offer on implicit bias, use of force, de-escalation techniques. We've always given that training. Now we open it to the public so they can make sure that the trainings we're offering are excellent. Now when an officer interacts with a citizen, he or she has to leave behind a card with the badge number on and a phone number to report an unpleasant experience if that's what happens. And we also did things like banning militarized camouflage and things like that. We've implemented more reform than most cities, and I'm very proud of that.
Mr. Finkbeiner, 45 seconds to rebut.
I find the accusations that my opponent is making this evening interesting. I don't want to second guess what happened back then. I was not there. I was not on the streets. And being a police officer is not an easy task. I will say, again, ladies and gentlemen, Toledo's #1 problem today is violence. This mayor has not a clue except to send 5 young men out there with no public safety training to negotiate away violence in the neighborhoods of this city. I will leave that to the police department, and I think they will bring the violence down dramatically soon.
Mr. Mayor, once again, calling out the Violence Interrupters program. I'll give you 30 seconds.
Carty talks a lot about his 10-point plan, and I get it. It's great political rhetoric. But if you notice, he hardly ever talks about what those 10 points are. And my sense is because he's probably embarrassed by them. Most of them are things we're already doing. A couple of them are things that have been proven not to work, and 2 of them are taken straight out of the 19th century. One of the 10-point plan is to have installed drop boxes at fire stations so people can make suggestions. Maybe that made sense before the invention of the telephone, but not now. You can't solve 21st century problems with 19th century thinking.
Mr. Finkbeiner, I'll give you another 30 seconds.
It continues to trouble me how loose the mayor is with accusations, such as I was the only mayor in 165 years. That was over, not a rule, but upon my failing to identify in the Ethics Commission report that I'd sold my condominium down on the waterfront. That was that, ladies and gentlemen. I just think you all need to know that this mayor plays it very fast and very loose with facts.
Tiffany Tarpley joining us once again as we continue to field some of those questions from the WTOL editorial board. Tiffany?
Mr. Finkbeiner, this question is for you. So the CDC, and we know that municipalities across the country within the past year or so have declared racism a public health threat. We know Toledo and Lucas County have declared it a public health emergency. Do you believe there is an issue of systemic racism today in Toledo in areas like education, healthcare, and law enforcement? And if so, are there new and actionable steps that you would take day one in office to directly address what so many believe is a crisis?
I do believe there is racism in public health. There's ample evidence to confirm that. If I'm elected mayor, I want to take a look at the Toledo-Lucas County Board of Health. They've had a challenge. I acknowledge they've had a big challenge. But I'm not certain that we have done as much as we can do to equalize and fairly treat illness, mental health, and other very important challenges to not only the African American community, but the entire community. But I do agree with the premise that the minority communities, plural, have been shortchanged when it comes to health services provided.
Mr. Mayor, you have 45 seconds.
This is an issue that perhaps Carty and I agree. I too agree that racism is a public health issue and a public health crisis. One of the ways you respond to that is by making meaningful investments in communities that haven't been made ever, or certainly not in a long time, and that's what we've done. We demolished the old Driggs Dairy near St. Martin de Porres Church, which for years had been a blight. Soon will be an opportunity for senior housing. We made $2.5 million, or we are making $2.5 million of investments in the Frederick Douglass Community Center, and we are also using the American Rescue Plan to build a new YMCA in the core of our community, something that hadn't been done in over 50 years. We do have to make fundamental investments in neighborhoods that have been neglected for far too long, and under my administration we have and will continue.
Gentlemen, when we put out the call to Toledoans, they did such a great job coming up with questions for both of you. We go to Zainab Shaib. She's got another question from one of our residents for you tonight.
I got in touch with Arab American Ashraf Bougnini, who has been a Toledo resident for 2 years, and he has a question for both candidates. What kind of job opportunities or opportunities in general would you have for people who immigrated to Toledo?
I wanted to know if they have any specific policies that would integrate immigrants in a way, in a professional way and also in a social way, if there are any specific policies that they have for that.
Obviously a very important topic over the last few months. We'll start with Carty Finkbeiner and his answer to that.
I wish I could consider myself an expert in this field, but I'm not. The one thing I turn to whenever I have questions of that pertain to the Hispanic Latino community is Waldemar Velasquez, a lifelong friend. And I will turn to Waldemar Velasquez for guidance on this. I can say that the Sister Cities International program has done a wonderful job over the years, perhaps not having to deal with the immigrant issue solely, but in a very related way, making immigrants to Northwest Ohio feel comfortable and at home quickly here. We've welcomed the Muslims. We feel wonderful in our relationship with the Muslim community. I think there's work to be done, and I will make sure that that work gets done, and I will turn to Waldemar Velasquez for advice and counsel.
Mr. Mayor, 45 seconds on this same topic.
One of the reasons I think Toledo works is that it feels like a family, that we're all in this together, and we love everyone. We accept everyone, whether it's my Polish ancestors or Carty's German ancestors. This city was built on immigrants. We've done a lot of work with Welcome Toledo Lucas County to incorporate those from the immigrant community. We've had some real successes, frankly, with those from Afghanistan and Syria. I think at the end of the day, though, what immigrants want is what we all want. Jobs, opportunity. And that's why I'm so proud that we won the award this year to be ranked the #1 city in the entire country for business investment. Not #1 in Northwest Ohio, not #1 in Ohio, #1 in the entire country. Immigrants and all of us benefit from that.
We hope you're enjoying this healthy debate between two men vying for the mayoral position here in the Glass City. We continue our questions from the WTOL editorial board. Melissa Andrews is back.
Jeff, our next question tonight is for Mr. Mayor, and I know that Mr. Finkbeiner has also had plenty of experience in this topic during his administration. Of course, this involves taxes. Mr. Mayor, this question comes from Derek Strelo tonight. What could be done to the city budget to eliminate the now 40-year running 3/4 temporary city income tax? This was initiated to make up for a budget shortfall during a recession, and now every 4 years brings the threat of cuts to police, fire, and EMS services if voters do not renew them. This needs to end at some point. So what can you do as mayor to bring this nearly half a century temporary fleecing of taxpayers to an end? Mr. Mayor?
I think the better way to think about this question is from the standpoint of investment. From the perspective of investment, Toledo ranks last among all of the big cities in Ohio in terms of the amount of money we spend on ourselves. We should care enough about ourselves to invest in ourselves. It shouldn't be that we are last among the big cities in how much we spend on our roads and our police and our fire. a city that believes in itself wants to invest in ourselves. That's what I saw last November when the metro parks, when the citizens approved a $200 million bond issue for the metro parks. You wouldn't make that kind of investment in the middle of a pandemic if you didn't believe that things were moving the right direction and if you didn't want to invest in yourselves. I'd say the same thing in answering this question. And last November, both Carty and I both supported the new roads levy, which sets aside for the first time ever a stream of money that can only be spent fixing roads. And this year we broke all the records. Thank goodness we did that.
Mr. Finkbeiner, 0.75% tax. You have 45 seconds.
I like it being reviewed every 4 years. I think it keeps all of us abreast of exactly how that money's being used. It was not being used properly in the past. Respectfully stated, I did spend only CIP money on restructuring, but every other mayor has been using it to balance the budget of the city of Toledo. This mayor doesn't have to do that, and he wonders why he's so successful at the moment versus other mayors when you get $190 million from the federal government to help you balance your budget. That's pretty good. I wish I'd had $190 million. I stand behind the 0.75% tax being reviewed on every 4-year basis because I think it keeps the people confident that taxpayers are getting the benefit of the doubt on that expenditure.
Mr. Mayor, the federal stimulus dollars brought up as part of his answer. You have 45 seconds.
Well, I am glad that I just got Carty to admit that I'm doing a good job as mayor. I hope the voters remember that next Tuesday. I want to make an important point, though. We got our budget in order before the pandemic. We got our budget in order before the American Rescue Plan came. I inherited a $3 million deficit. After the first year, we had a $17 million surplus. We were frugal. We saved for a rainy day. And thank goodness, because the last 18 months it's been raining. And one of the reasons I think the city of Toledo has done a better job than most cities surviving the pandemic is because we were so frugal and budgeted so well before it began. I am extraordinarily proud of what we've done to get the city's budget in order. It happened before the pandemic, and it sure as heck happened before the relief of the pandemic.
Tim Miller back now with another question for our candidates. Tim?
Yes, a direct question to challenger Carty Finkbeiner. With the pandemic being such a huge topic, not only in this debate tonight, but for every American, what would you do when it comes to vaccine mandates or a mask mandate? We know some cities like Columbus have instituted a mask mandate. The city of Toledo has not. Your opponent has not. Would you ever consider that as mayor if this goes on longer? And what would you do to get the city to come out of this pandemic, however long it takes?
Well, Tim, that's a big if. If this goes on longer and there doesn't seem to be a solution, a medical solution or a scientific solution, then at that time we would need to look and see what is the required course of action to protect American children, senior citizens, and everyone else. I believe, though, today we are making progress. I believe today it would be a mistake to order the workforce to mask up. I think it could be quite challenging for some workers in the private sector, Jeep workers and others in factory settings. Could be quite uncomfortable, maybe unhealthy, actually, to have those masks on working where it's hot. So I would let the doctors and the scientists guide us. But at the present time, I think the policy of letting individuals make their choice is sound.
Mr. Mayor, 45 seconds, mandates, vaccine and/or masks.
I think we have to be nimble enough in government to adapt our decisions based on new facts and new realities. As facts change, our response may change. And at different times over the last 19 months, the city of Toledo has reacted differently at different stages of the crisis. And I think we did it well, we did it thoughtfully, we did it calmly, and we showed strong leadership. I believe that the best thing we can do is to provide incentives for good behavior. So whether it is maybe having a free night at the Mud Hens or free night at the Walleye if you can show proof of vaccination and things of that nature. Maybe, money off on your meal at Mancy's or something like that if you could show proof of vaccination. I think those sorts of positive incentives make a lot of difference, and I'd like to see them continue.
Morning anchor Tiffany Tarpley joins us once again with another question for our candidates. Tiffany?
Well, Mr. Mayor, sticking with this theme of the pandemic, we've known that this pandemic has really brought out a lot of the flaws within systems, within government, within social justice, and things of that nature. Several agencies and organizations have discussed lessons learned during the pandemic. You talked about some of the good things that your administration has done, but looking back, is there anything that you would have changed at any point during this pandemic? What were some of your top missteps, do you think?
With regard to how we approached responding to the pandemic, I don't have any regrets. I don't have any second thoughts or doubts. I don't have any. I wouldn't want any do-overs. Now, that's not to say that we made every decision right. We're human beings, and human beings make mistakes, and sometimes our decisions are wrong. I don't know if they were in this case, but I'm willing to admit that any leader, any human being is capable of making a mistake. It does, though, reveal what I think is an important philosophy of my time as mayor. We're going to try things, and we have tried things, whether it's economic development, fixing roads, balancing the budget, growing the size of the police force. All of our successes were based on a premise and a belief that we're going to try things. We're not going to be guilty of sitting down and feeling sorry for ourselves and twiddling our thumbs. We're going to try things, and some of them are going to work and some of them aren't. And the ones that don't work, we're going to learn from them. We're going to dust ourselves off and try something else. I think that's an important leadership technique of mine. I think we showed it during the pandemic, and I like to think we show it across the board at all times.
Carty Finkbeiner watching from the sidelines. You have 45 seconds to comment.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I really don't remember the mayor taking a leadership role on the pandemic whatsoever. I think that Toledo-Lucas County Board of Health's Executive Director, Eric, did a very fine job. I think the teamwork between the various hospitals in our city and the medical offices in our city that were available to treat individuals, I think they did a commendable job. And I believe from the state of Ohio, Governor DeWine did a pretty fine job of keeping us very enlightened and informed. I don't really recall the mayor of the city of Toledo doing that, but perhaps I just didn't see television that day.
As we said at the opening, we flipped a coin before everything started here this evening. We gave that opportunity to open opening statements, Carty Finkbeiner, and we're going to give the opportunity for him to open closing statements with the last statement from Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz. So, Mr. Finkbeiner, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, TV 11. Thank you very much. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in tonight. There's a lot we could talk about, but let's just get to the basics of what makes a city tick. A city's made ticks by three things. First, there has to be jobs. Secondly, there has to be public safety. Thirdly, it has to be clean. Wade has not really brought any jobs to Toledo, Ohio. Oh, they're going to cities like Troy Township, and they're going to southeastern Michigan. Wood County, Rossford, is cleaning up with new company after new company going in out into Rossford, Perrysburg Township. This mayor can't, like I can, point to Jeep, Owens Corning, docks, etc. Secondly, clean city is the mayor's responsibility, and we have an unclean city. It will be clean and safe under Carty Finkbeiner.
Mr. Mayor, your closing statement.
Well, Carty must have also not been watching TV when we won all those awards for the jobs that we've created during my term. But nonetheless, probably from some of the moments of this debate, you might think that there's an animosity between the two of us. There really isn't. I have a high respect for Carty. I really do. I've worked with him in the past and consider him someone who provides wise counsel. You can respect whatever successes he may have had in the past without thinking, though, that that's the path for the future. Elections are about the future. Now that we're finally creating jobs, and indeed finally winning national awards for our job creation, now that we're finally fixing our roads, now that we finally got the regional water deal done, now that we finally have our budget in order, and in fact, now that we're finally growing the size of the police force, why would we ever go back? Why go back when we have so much going on, when we're moving forward and building on our success? I don't believe we should go back to the past. I want to keep building. And I think the citizens of Toledo also want to keep building. Let's keep building.
Gentlemen, we want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts for joining us, and for you, the viewers, for taking some time this evening to be informed on what these two candidates bring to the table. Once again, looking for re-election, Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz and his challenger, Carty Finkbeiner. Thank you so much for your insightful answers and your positivity, and also your spirit behind the glass city. We want to remind you that voting day comes up next Tuesday, a week from today. The early voting center in Lucas County continues to stay open if you want to get that vote in before the big election day. Stick with us. Coming up next on WTOL 11 News at 6, many school districts in our area dropping that mask requirement. That is breaking news. You might have gotten that sent to your phones. The districts telling us why they're doing it and what parents need to know. That's coming up. Also, a big development in the fight against breast cancer, a groundbreaking study providing new hope for a vaccine that could prevent it. That's coming straight ahead.
After a beautiful, bright, sunny day,